We're especially pleased to have all of you here. I've been thinking about this event and introductory remarks, and I thought that half a dozen or maybe a little more years ago, more or less everybody talked about access being the primary issue. I'm happy to say that among many others, APLU and USU were also saying it's access plus retention plus completion. And that dialogue hasn't totally changed, but by and large, that's what the academic community is saying. We have to watch it, because access doesn't happen automatically, and we certainly know that retention and completion doesn't either. So it's in that spirit of that we're all here today. During that half a dozen years or more, not only has the dialogue changed, the story, if you will, but also we've learned a lot about how to improve retention and graduation. We've got here today a number of people that have lived that story. They can really talk about that. And I think the matter for us now is to continue to push on access, but really use what we've learned and expand upon it to get those retention and graduation numbers. And let me now introduce Mark Becker, president of Georgia State, whose institution, who's personally have certainly lived this story. Mark is the chair of the board of Urban Serving Universities this year. Mark?
Thank you, Peter. I've got it all. Thank you, Peter, and it's a real pleasure to be here with you as we kick off this important Urban Serving Universities collaborative effort. You know, in this time, this political season, we keep reading in the media, seeing on television about how divided we are as a nation. But one thing that we have agreement across the political spectrum on is the importance of what's called the college completion agenda. The President of the United States has set a series of college completion targets by 2020. Numerous Republican governors have signed on to Complete College America. There may be different ways to get there, but this is an issue around which, as a nation, we are actually united. We need to have a more educated population to assure the economic future of this country, as well as the social fabric of this country. What's also clear from the data is there are two things we must do to be successful. We must broaden who participates. There are not enough low-income students. That's the access part. But we also must have much greater success. Because the reality right now for this nation is if you're born into the top quarter of the socioeconomic strata, you have a better than 80% chance of getting a college degree. You have an over 90% chance of going to college and a 90% chance of graduating. On the other hand, if you're born into the bottom quarter of the socioeconomic strata, you have about a 1 in 10 chance of getting that college education. So we have to broaden who participates and achieve success at high rates. And this is where urban serving universities come in, because we are going to be, without question, central to the future of this nation and the success of the college completion agenda in our states and across our nation. We are large institutions. My own institution has over 30,000 students in baccalaureate and graduate and professional programs and another 20,000 in associate's degree programs. Most of your large urban institutions enroll tens of thousands of students. Second, we are diverse. My institution is majority-minority. There is no majority group within our institution. Caucasian, African American, Asian American, Hispanic, mixed race, it all comes together in our urban institutions, as well as international students from around the world. That's the future of this nation. Those are the future demographics of our nation. Those are our urban serving universities today, and of course, for the future. We are also socioeconomically diverse. My institution's 60% Pell population. Finding Pell populations 30, 40, 50, 60% is not uncommon in our urban universities. That's where you're going to get that diversity across the socioeconomic spectrum. On top of that, our urban universities are constructively partnered in a multitude of ways that are going to be the key to success for students, and then not only with getting their degrees, but in the workforce. You will hear time and time again how we're constructively partnered with community colleges, how we have so many transfer students as well as students that we enroll as freshmen, And we're constructively partnered because we're in cities, with government, with the not-for-profit, the NGO community, and of course with the corporate community, where we can provide incredible experiential opportunities right in our cities, in our metropolitan areas for our students. You bring all this together and you have the solution to the college completion agenda. There's only one challenge. The students I just described historically at our institutions and institutions across the land have not succeeded at high rates. 1 in 3, roughly, have historically graduated. For the baby boomers who remember, look to your left, look to your right, in 4 years, one of you won't be here. The reality is at that same time for the baby boomers in these institutions, if it was look to your left and look to your right, in 4 years, 2 of you won't be here. That's not good enough. We must find solutions. And that's, again, where these institutions are so important. That's what your panels are going to talk to you today, about the innovation taking place at urban institutions so that the students who start actually get to graduation and finish. And how they do that work at their institutions, but then just as importantly, how we collaborate. At urban serving universities and within APLU, we're trying to pioneer new methods to actually much more intentionally and intensely engage with one another so we can accelerate the rate at which we learn. You take a simple concept that's been around in higher education for more than 20 years, freshman learning communities. Freshman learning communities are known to actually facilitate greater retention and graduation. The idea has been around 20 years, and yet you still see press releases of universities discovering this. We can't take 10 and 20 years to spread the ideas that work. We have to work much more intensely and intentionally so that as the good ideas come up, they can be tested. They can be tested not only within our institutions and across our institutions. And that's what this work is about. So at this time, it's my pleasure to introduce your moderator, Goldie Blumenstock, somebody that does not require an introduction, at least within a higher education crowd. She's very well known for her work at the Chronicle of Higher Education. She's also the author of the bestseller published in 2015, Higher Education in Crisis, What Everyone Needs to Know. So I think you're it. Goldie, please.
Hello, everybody. I'm Goldie Blumenstock. For those of you who know me from the Twitter world, at Goldie Standard. So as best as I can tell, I was invited to moderate this session here today for 2 interrelated reasons. The book that I published last year with Oxford Press, American Higher Education in Crisis, What Everyone Needs to Know, and the new reporting project that my colleague and I, Jeff Young, are started to begin working on at the Chronicle right now. I'd be happy to talk to anyone about the book afterwards, but for now I'll just say that after nearly 28 years reporting at the Chronicle, it's been really incredibly gratifying to me to see that the book has been so well received and that so many people, including so many of you in this room, have found it as a useful primer for your board meetings, for your staff and faculty retreats, and some classes in higher ed. But more importantly, I've had a really great opportunity with this book to share some of the ideas and analysis on radio and TV shows and at events, and I'm not saying that to brag, but because these have been two-way conversations a lot. So I've also heard back from quite a lot of people out there in the public, not just the higher ed, within the higher ed bubble. So what I thought I'd share with you today for a minute to sort of set this stage are some of the issues that continue to strike me as some of the more important issues that are of concern to your students, to the families of your students, to policymakers, to taxpayers, and to your donors. So I should note, actually, by the way, that when people heard I was writing this book and they saw I had a question mark in it, they kind of asked me, why did I put the question mark in the title? And I debated it a little bit. I debated it with my publisher a little bit as well. But in the end, I insisted on it because I really thought at the time and even today, a lot of the discussion, so much of this narrative out there really lacks nuance. And it also really didn't reflect a lot of the innovation that was actually going on campuses right now. Oh, that's a lot better with the mic, isn't it? A lot of the innovation that's been going on campuses now, and I wanted this to reflect that. We'll hear a lot more about that innovation in a few minutes, but let me just run through really quickly, tick through some of these issues that I think really matter today. Costs and the business. I'm not going to elaborate on each one of these. I think this is an insider crowd. I think you know what I'm talking about, but if I had a to-do list, these are the ones I'd have on my to-do list. Not that they're easy to fix, by the way. Costs and the challenges to the business model. And frankly, colleges are running out of some strategies. You know, that model of going towards international students, Well, we're seeing that that model may have some limits. Those of you who read the news out of California certainly know that's the case. Distance education has always been kind of a go-to strategy, but I think people are realizing that market is getting a lot more competitive, and unless you have a lot of in-house capital and in-house human capital, we're going to hear about some of that today too. That's also a hard strategy to pull off and make it profitable, or make it self-sustaining, let's say. Adult education market is also becoming an increasingly competitive market. Not for nothing that LinkedIn paid $1.5 billion to buy lynda.com. And when it comes to philanthropy, there's still this problem of the rich and the rest. You all know what that's like too as you get out there try to raise money. The rich-poor divide among students, a giant problem. Mark alluded to it. A lot of the solutions we're going to hear about today relate to that challenge, and it's real. The accountability agenda, it's still out there. And I know the scorecard as a tool of, the college scorecard never really was adopted as a tool of federal policy. It's not going to affect how colleges are funded by the federal government. So that's great. That's a victory for some of the colleges who didn't really think that scorecard was a very good tool. They thought of it as too blunt an instrument. But the reality is there's still a lot of salary data that remains in that scorecard, and I think it's pretty clear that that gainful employment ethos, that ROI understanding of higher education is not going away. Governance. We have speakers here from Illinois, Oregon, and Florida, so I don't think I need to say too much more about governance challenges that public colleges face. You all are dealing with those a lot more than I am every day. The over-reliance on contingent faculty and the future implications for the professoriate. A giant challenge, and it's something that we're dealing with a lot at the Chronicle these days too. And finally, I would just talk about the fate of the campus. In the book, I talk a little bit about Ray Oldenburg's theory of third places, and I make the case that on the higher education landscape, the campus is that third place, and it's an important part of the future of higher education. I do think there's a lot of creative thinking going on right now about making better use of the campus, doubling down on the facilities and using them as a teaching tool. There's been some interesting mergers out there between universities and museums and other cultural institutions, and I think that's part of the future of higher education that we're going to see, which is, frankly, a good way for me to segue for just for a minute about why, after 3 years working on this book, I'm really just so excited about this new reporting project that we're doing here at the Chronicle that I do with my colleague, Jeff Young. We call it Relearning, Mapping the New Education Landscape. Quick commercial, I put a little flyer out there about that. It's got some information on how you can learn a little bit more about it. The notion of this is pretty simple, as we say on our page. There's a new education landscape emerging. Colleges are changing, and they're being affected by a whole lot of other forces that weren't really as important as they are now. Outside forces like investors, outside forces like accountability organizations, and frankly, a lot more pressure from the public. And this new relearning project is going to sort of look at that future in a little different ways. In addition to the news and analysis, we're frankly a little bit of a journalism experiment. On relearning, we're doing stories on ideas that are selected by our readers through a voting process. And we're doing podcasts. In fact, the first podcast is up today. We've got an interview with Sal Khan, those of you who know Khan Academy. So check out that podcast and let us know what you think about that. And next Tuesday morning, by the way, if you haven't gotten the Relearning newsletter in your inbox, please make sure that you've signed up for that. So what are we going to be covering in Relearning? What's the new landscape as we see it? I think that I've done a story called The Embedded For-Profit. That was sort of our kickoff story. And I think that's kind of emblematic of what this new project is going to look at. It talked a little bit about the new ways to think about the implications that colleges are facing now that companies, coaching companies, international pathways companies, data analytics companies are playing such a big role in higher education, much more closer to the teaching core of the institution. And that has implications for governance, for regulatory patterns, for even the way you deal with your faculty. So that's a symbol of the kind of story we're going to be doing. And I should also say we've been fascinated by a host of other topics that are, big deal topics on the disruptor circuit. Everything from the credentials craze to new financial models for colleges, thinking about a 45-year relationship perhaps, rather than a 4-year one. New models of accreditation. Some of you have heard this phrase, that eventually the ultimate accreditor will be the employer. I think if you buy that argument, I think it has big implications for what accreditation is going to look like in a few years. The mountains of investment pouring into higher education and competency-based education. And frankly, even MOOCs. I mean, I know we were all excited about MOOCs, and then we were all bored by MOOCs. But frankly, if you looked at a story we had this week in the paper about MOOCs and some institutions using MOOCs, as an entry point into graduate education. I think we are actually starting to see that MOOCs will be, in fact, a force that matters in the future of higher education. And I'll just close by noting that one of the things that's really important to us as we focus on our relearning project, it's a theme that we also kept very front of mind when we worked on our College Reinvented series a few years ago, and that's a very simple one, which is reinvention for whom? And having talked to the teams from these 3 universities, I know that's also a really key strategy for some of them. So with that, let's get to it, and let me introduce our first bunch of panelists today. We have a team here from the University of Illinois at Chicago, led by Manny Pollack, to my immediate left, Interim Vice Provost for Undergraduate Affairs. Next to him is Tom Moss, Associate Vice Provost for Undergraduate Affairs. Maria Calderon, Margie Brill, who is the Senior Success Counselor at Bottom Line. We're going to hear a little bit more about Bottom Line and what they're doing at USC in a minute. And Maria Calderon, who's a biochemistry student. Shouldn't you be studying right now? Yeah. And I think Manny's going to kick it off.
Well, thank you very much, Goldie. It's a real pleasure for us to be here in Washington, and we're actually delighted to have been invited to participate in this gathering. I should mention from the start, Michael Amaritas, Chancellor of the University of Illinois at Chicago, and Susan Poser, our Provost, both regret that they were unable to join in today. Now, over the past 2 years, UIC has embarked on a very deep and broad mission to improve the success of our undergraduates, which has been in great ways galvanized by the leadership at the University of Illinois Chicago. Through the involvement of a couple of hundred individuals, faculty, staff, administrators, students, we have developed an extensive collective of 39 projects that we believe to be or will be effective in making differences for our students. Now, of these projects, 16 are currently either underway or completed. 4 new ones have just come online. And the projects, being such a massive undertaking, are directed through a formal project management system, which has been, for which we received assistance in developing from our colleagues at Portland State University. We appreciate their involvement, as well as through the Transformational Planning Grant, which supported it through the APLU. As examples of the types of projects we've been engaged in include the reform of developmental math, which is really a national issue, the marketing of a Finish in 4 campaign. Some other institutions have these underway. An intensive look at our advising system and enhancing our advising through greater collaboration across the various units on campus. We have recently made summer school more accessible by revamping the way tuition for the summer is calculated and assessed, and the opening of a teaching and learning center, among many other projects. With large number of our undergraduates coming from the city of Chicago, that is from the Chicago Public Schools and from the Chicago Community Colleges, we can be assured that UIC is fully engaged with the city of Chicago and its leadership. That said, however, this afternoon we are showcasing a truly transformational program that's representative of our commitment to the values of institutional change. Our transition coaching program effectively ties us to the Chicago community and the public schools as a major step in encouraging college enrollment and the completion of college degrees. And now I would like to turn this over to Tom Moss, our Associate Vice Provost, who will introduce the transition coaching program. Tom.
Thank you, Manny, and thanks again for the opportunity to tell you a little bit about what we've been up to at UIC as a result of the Transformational Planning Grant. First, by way of context, a little bit about UIC. We are situated just at the west of the Loop of Chicago on certain mornings, nearly in the shadow of the Willis Tower, which we should all agree to call the Sears Tower forever. We are typically ranked one of the 10 most diverse campuses in the university, or in the country. Like Georgia State, we have no ethnic or racial majority on our campus. According to FAFSA data, 46% of this year's incoming class was first generation in college. 72% of that same incoming class of Latinos were first generation, the highest proportion. Of that same group, 57% were Pell eligible, and 73% of our Latinos were Pell eligible. We are the largest public university in Chicago. We are a Research One institution. And over the last 20 years, our graduation rates have been trending up. They started in the mid-30s 20 years ago or so, currently at 60% for a 6-year graduation rate. While that's a tick above the nation's average, it still means for us, every cohort we leave about 1,200 or so students behind that don't graduate, which we all agree is unconscionable. As Manny mentioned, we've been engaged for some years on a student success initiative. We've been working very hard internally to build bridges and collaborations among a decentralized university. But we've also, during that time, started to work more seriously with external partners. As Manny mentioned, we have built a strong relationship with the City of Chicago, with Chicago Public Schools in particular. We've also have a leadership role in Thrive Chicago, which is a cradle-to-career collective impact initiative built on the Strive model, which I'm sure you are familiar with. So, transition coaching. We started to meet with a number of people from organizations around town. There's about 40 or so that do this kind of work, where they begin building relationships with students while they're in high school or just prior to matriculation, and then maintain those relationships through the first year or beyond. So they're very useful in connecting students to resources, in providing mentoring, and just generally being a friendly face to help clear roadblocks as they arise. We learned that a number of organizations are doing this work, primarily in Chicago charter schools and community-based organizations. We began meeting with folks. So in January 2014, we were pleased to meet with the national leadership of Bottom Line as they were contemplating, actually performing, a move into Chicago, having already been established in Boston, in Massachusetts, and in New York. Through those conversations and through discussions with colleagues at the University of Massachusetts in Boston, who are also engaged in this kind of work, and with the generous funding of the Transformational Planning Grant, our transition coaching pilot was born, built on a simple concept, simple question. What if we could coordinate the work that these transition organizations, these coaches, were already doing on our campus, meeting where they could, when they could, with our students, provide them internet access, provide them space on campus, access to our resources, and a knowledge base that could get the students to the appropriate resources and just in time. What if we could do that? So beginning in fall 2015, with 4 partners, including our friends at Bottom Line, we began this project. And so, how's it going? I guess is the reason we're here, and I'm delighted to have Margie Brill here from Bottom Line, along with Maria, to help answer that question. So I'll hand it over to them now.
Thank you, Tom, Manny, and everyone, APLU, for inviting us to be here. We're so excited to talk with you about our partnership with UIC and all the great work that Bottom Line's doing on a national level as well. So my name's Margie. I have been working with Bottom Line for about 3 years. I started in our Massachusetts office and then actually moved to Chicago 2 years ago in July of 2014 to help launch our office there. And UIC was one of the first schools I started working with as a counselor. So excited to tell you more about UIC, but before that, I want to give you a little bit of context into our organization. So Bottom Line started about 18 years ago in Boston, Massachusetts by a former high school guidance counselor that had seen so many students get into college and then not graduate and drop out for a variety of reasons. And so he started with a cohort of 25 students and worked with those students not only to get in, but then every single year of college until they graduated. And that was kind of the basis of our program. So now we're serving around 5,000 students nationally. We have offices still in Massachusetts, also in New York. That office opened about 5 years ago, and then now Bottom Line Chicago. where we're working with UIC. And essentially the mission of Bottom Line is to help first generation low-income students not only get into college, but graduate from college on time and go far in life. And the go far component refers to actually our career program, where we are helping students to develop a strong post-graduation plan, whether it is grad school or a full-time job. We really carry students the whole way past the degree. And so to be in Bottom Line, students have to be low income, and we define that as Pell Grant eligible. They have to be first generation, so neither parent have received a bachelor's degree in the United States. They have to be attending one of our partner colleges that we work with, and we have around 50 of those across our 3 sites. And then they have to be a resident of the city where the Bottom Line office is. So in Chicago, that's a lot of eligible students. And we're really proud of our results. Historically, 79% of our college seniors have graduated. And what's really exciting is over the past 3 years, that trend's actually gone up to around 80%. And last year, 83% of our students graduated. So as we're getting bigger, we're getting better at what we do, and a lot of that has to do with our college partnerships and a lot of the support that we're getting. So we're really excited about that. What we actually do to work with students is we provide individualized on-campus support. So counselors like me travel to campuses during the week. UIC is one of the campuses I'm at the most. And we are meeting with students one-on-one and providing them a variety of different services. And these services are intentional. It's based on what the student needs. And all of these services fall into we call it our DEAL model, which stands for Degree, Employability, Aid, and Life. So within those areas, we have tons of different things, whether it's FAFSA renewal or test-taking strategies, or generally referring students to a lot of resources on campus, sometimes even walking students to office hours if they're nervous to do it. Ultimately, what our four goals are for every one of our students are: for degree, we want students to graduate with a bachelor's degree. For employability, we want them to have a strong post-graduation plan and the ability to implement it. For aid, we want students to graduate with less than $36,000 in student loan debt by the end of their time in college. And for life, we want our students to be responsible and resourceful in college and beyond. So those are the goals. We do assessments at the end of each semester, analyzing how our students did. That involves both quantitative and qualitative data collection. So we're looking at GPAs, credit accrual, financial aid, and then having a conversation with the student about all of that. You know, if a student failed a class, we're asking, what happened? What can you be doing to improve next semester? And we use those assessment results to then make their service plan for the following semester. We also, that's all tracked in our database. So what's really cool is we can actually share all that data and reports with our colleges and high school partners. So we can actually say, hey, these are the trends as counselors, as an outside organization that we're seeing on campus. We notice a lot of students are struggling with X, Y, and Z, or this particular class. And I've been able, as an example, to share some of that with Tom and have actually made some changes on campus as a result, which has been really exciting. And talking more about UIC and our partnership. So like Tom said, when we started our organization in Chicago, or opened that office, I should say, it was right when UIC had received the APLU grant, so it just seemed like a really great opportunity. We knew that UIC has been a really strong thought leader with higher education, and especially for graduation for first-gen low-income students in Chicago. And so it just seemed like a great school for us to work with, and it's been a great experience for the last 2 years. There's a lot of benefits for us working with UIC.
Marty, can I interrupt you for a second?
Yeah.
I know we want to hear from Maria, but I know you also work with a lot of other colleges in Chicago.
We do.
So can you talk, 10 others, right?
Yeah.
My memory was right.
That's right.
Hey, right on there, yeah. Can you tell us what's different what have you learned that's different at UIC with some of the other schools? So maybe there's what have you learned there that works for UIC that is different than what happens at other campuses?
Yeah, that's great. And actually, that's a perfect segue. Just going to get into that. So one of the things, and Tom mentioned this, but UIC provides us space on campus, which may seem like not a big deal, but it is, to actually have an office on campus where we have internet, we can meet with students there, and it's consistent. That really helps us with being able to have, we're not switching up our location. We have one consistent space where both our commuter students and residential students can come, and we've been tracking attendance and noticed that that's really helped. Also, something that's been really helpful with UIC is that they've actually helped us recruit students for our program, so they know they want to increase their graduation rate for first-generation low-income students, and they actually send out emails and communication to every student that's been accepted to UIC and has enrolled that fits that criteria from the city of Chicago. So they actually identified those students, shared information about Bottom Line, and then that's actually how we get quite a few of our students to work on campus. The other thing that's been really helpful about the partnership is UIC, and this person is Tom right now, but UIC provides us a point person, so who we can direct any question to. So like, for example, let's say I'm working with Maria on her financial aid application, like a verification form, and there's something on it that is confusing and we need to clarify. Like, I can go to Tom in this shared office space and say, hey, Tom, who should I talk to in financial aid? This is the problem my student's having. So kind of serving as that like centralized support on quite a decentralized campus is very helpful as well.
And is there something about the scale of the program? How many students do you have?
So we have 102 students, 103 on campus.
Is that big for you, or big site for you?
Yeah, definitely. That's our largest campus that we are working with right now in Chicago.
And does that scale make a difference in what you're doing, one way or the other?
Yeah, I mean, I think that because we have more staff and more students that are dedicated to that campus, like we're there more, we have a presence there more. And also, we just know that there are so many students from Chicago that are first gen and low income that are going to UIC. So we know as an organization that's like a campus that we want to be at. So we can make a difference and help more students.
Great.
Yeah, great. So I am thrilled, that's a great segue as well. I am thrilled to introduce to all of you my student Maria, and I'm gonna let her introduce herself for the most part, but I just want to say it's been so great working with her, and I'm so excited she's here today. She joined our program the summer before she started going to UIC. So we've met multiple times on campus, and so we're just going to talk about what that experience has been like for all of you. So Maria, take it away.
Thank you, Margie. Could everyone hear me? Okay. So, hello, my name is Maria Calderon. I am a first-year student at UIC. I am majoring in biochemistry, and I have a pre-medicine goal, so I hope to go to medical school. I live in the northwest side of Chicago. I attended Carl Schurz High School. It is a very diverse high school. I am the eldest of 4 girls, and I am also a first-generation student. Both of my parents were employed, and they were cooks, but then my dad got into an accident, and so now it's just my mom working.
Yeah. And how did you hear about Bottom Line?
I first heard about Bottom Line through my high school guidance counselor. She came up to me and said that I met the requirements, and so that same day there was a meeting at my high school, and so I went. And I was really impressed with Bottom Line and with the work they did, and so that same day I applied.
Yeah, awesome. And why did you decide to go to UIC?
Bottom Line gives me the support that my parents cannot, since my parents didn't go to school. I think they only went up to like middle school, so it's kind of difficult for them to provide the academic support I need. And so Bottom Line actually helped me with tutoring. I received a D for my midterm grade in chemistry, and it was very devastating, and I was kind of scared, and so Margie referred me to tutoring, and after a couple of sessions, I gained the confidence I needed, and so for my final, I received an A, and for the overall class, I received a B, which was, it gave me the confidence boost I needed for my spring semester.
Yeah, and now you're doing really great in the spring, which is awesome.
Thank you.
And I remember, so I want to go back to like your decision to go to UIC, which I know you and I had talked about. I remember in our first meeting, like you had really wanted to go out of state, but UIC seemed like a more affordable option, but you also wanted to live on campus, and that was important to you. So I remember when we first met in August, you were really concerned about financial aid and being able to pay for college. Can you talk about that experience a little bit more?
So after I accepted UIC, I decided to live in the dorms, and even though it was a bit pricey, both of my parents were working, so it was a manageable price. But then my dad got into an accident, and so it was just my mom paying the bills. And it got a little bit difficult, and I think if it weren't for Bottom Line, I wouldn't have set up a payment plan, and I wouldn't be in school right now, which was really helpful, and so I really appreciate that.
Yeah, and I remember we like talked on the phone. I had learned about how to set up the payment plan, was able to connect with financial aid, and we were able to do it together, which is great. And what is your long-term goal after graduating from UIC?
I hope to be on track for success, and along with that, I hope to go to medical school to become a cardiologist. So
Great. Yeah, and you're doing awesome so far, so thank you so much. And I'm going to turn it back to Manny to wrap up for
Well,
us.
actually,
unless you
I
any
have a
questions.
question for the whole panel for one question.
Yeah,
I mean, I have a
great.
bunch of questions, but the one long one, I'm not sure who the best person is to answer this, but this program is sort of aimed at students coming right out of high school, going into college. Is there anything that you've learned so far that would be applicable to adult students as well? Even whether it's the financial aid counseling or some of the other stuff, because obviously these institutions have students of all ages.
Yeah, I mean, I think absolutely. I mean, at our university, we don't have a lot of adult learners, so we can't put this to the test. But
maybe,
I
maybe
can't.
Margie can.
Yeah.
Is there something? I mean, are there some things that would apply to adult learners as well, or are you primarily a high school focused?
We're primarily high school focused. So as of right now, I mean, we are exploring some different models so that we can try to work with more students, but for now, our organization only starts working with students who are incoming freshmen.
Let me just add that we recognize that a lot of the challenges students have moving from high school to college are not a lot different than students moving from community colleges to a four-year institution. And we're currently engaged in conversations with external organizations to provide transition coaching as well for community college students.
Great. I think we probably have to move on to the, we have to let the next group up, I think. So.
Okay.
Unless you wanted to close with that?
Yeah, just comment. I hope that the message that we're trying to put forward is the importance of having students think about college during their high school years, be prepared for it, and being able to then transition smoothly into college and through the first couple of years, recognizing the importance to their overall success of a college education. And this is an area that the transition coaching program certainly can do. I mentioned that we are moving into the community college transfer program, particularly with the city colleges of Chicago. And just sort of as a little sloganeering at the end,
I did it.
we are the University of Illinois at Chicago, and we're rapidly being identified as the University of Illinois for Chicago. So thank you very much.
All right, let's give it up for UIC.
Thanks.
Let's bring on Team Portland State. In between, I'm going to do a little tap dance here while everyone's getting ready. Yeah, well, you won't be that glad. Great. Okay, that was good, quick. Next up, we have Portland State University. We have two presenters here today. No, three presenters. Look at that. We have one presenter who's going to present the two other presenters. We have Sukwant Yaj, Vice Provost for Academic Innovation and Student Success, to my immediate left. Jeanne Anders, Management Faculty, School of Business. Faculty members, ladies and gentlemen, faculty members. Sarah Bradley, Program Director for the School of Social Work and the Associate Professor of Practice at the School of Social Work. Another faculty member. This is a fantastic opportunity, folks, because how often do you ever hear, when people are talking about the words, redesigning higher education, how often do we get to actually hear from faculty members who are in the mix? I can tell you, I go to a lot of conferences, and the answer is rarely. So let's take it away, Sukwant, and give us an introduction of what we're going to talk about a little bit today.
Sure thing. Thank you so much, and good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to briefly talk about Rethink PSU, a presidential initiative at Portland State University. It's a campus-wide effort to deliver an education that serves more students with better outcomes while containing costs through curricular innovation, community engagement, and effective use of technology. Provost Challenge was the first project we launched as part of Rethink PSU. We made an early decision that we wanted to hear ideas directly from our faculty and staff and decided to crowdsource the generation of ideas. Any faculty or staff member could submit an idea that responded to the project's theme. All ideas were visible and open to public comment, which is quite unique, and there were public listening sessions. The response far exceeded anything we had imagined. Our faculty and staff members submitted about 160 ideas, and over 1,000 of them participated in the process. The Provost Challenge allocated $3 million to support 24 projects to accelerate the use of technology and education delivery and to improve student success and graduation. The Provost Challenge was fully implemented in June 2015, My colleagues Jeanne Anders and Sarah Bradley will talk about their Provost Challenge project shortly. But I'd like to spend a few minutes talking about just this notion of transformation. In my opinion, for the work to be transformative, it must focus not only on the short-term success of an organization, but also the long-term success. And that we need to focus not only on what to do, but also how to do it. Our focus at Portland State is on building institutional capacity so we can succeed over the long term. While many institutions have created special units where the new instructional programs and the faculty that teach in them reside, that's not our approach. Our innovation is embedded across the university. We have a particular interest in using design thinking to understand the new needs of our students, and we are increasingly working on co-creating solutions with them. And just to share, I'm also a faculty member and an architect by training. I'd like to just briefly mention the next set of projects we are working on. Provost Challenge we have finished, and here are some things that we are currently working on as part of Rethink PSU. The first one is Pathways to Success. Here, our focus is on designing structured pathways for community college students to pursue a PSU degree. We have a very strong focus on degree completion, where we're working on advising reform, use of analytics and technology to improve student success. The projects include building a coordinated service network that connects advisors with financial aid, registrar's office, and bursar's office. We are building personalized degree maps that our students call the super awesome degree maps. And we are also working on online services. And these ideas, the 3 service concepts I mentioned to you earlier, were identified in close collaboration with our students. An area of focus for us is Psu Flexible Degrees. We intend to build about 25 such degrees in the coming years. Psu Flexible Degrees are focused on our academic programs that make effective use of technology to offer flexible, high quality, and affordable education for undergraduate students who have attended college without receiving a college student. So these are students who have dropped out either from a 4-year institution or from a community college, and we are quite focused on bringing them back, as well as for graduate students who seek new avenues. And in terms of the how of our work, I've shared a little bit on what we are working on. We believe that our innovation strategy needs to emotionally connect with the aspirations of our faculty and staff. Crowdsourcing was one way in which we were able to connect with that. We do our work with deep faith in our faculty's ability to be creative and innovative. We treat strategy as a dialogue as opposed to a ritualistic planning process. So the 160 projects that our faculty in some ways suggested as part of Provost Challenge provided the direction and gave meaning and form to Rethink PSU. Our bias is towards action. We use projects to explore future possibilities. We don't pilot. We apply execution discipline to the effort. Strategic renewal efforts cannot be accomplished by dedicated volunteers with day jobs. This is a really important point for long-term success. It requires our full-fledged commitment and the necessary funding and resources for project management and releasing faculty and staff time. And lastly, we are committed to creating a leadership community. Internally, our focus is on building a cohort of leaders who can champion this work over time. And externally, we are absolutely delighted to be working with our colleagues in APLU and as part of the Urban Serving University initiatives over the last year and even before, which has given us an inside view of how others are leading the innovation efforts. Thank you for being great listeners. And next, my colleague Jeanne Anders will talk about her work.
Thanks, Sequant. I'm Jeanne Anders. I am on the management faculty, as we mentioned. There are 2 points I really want to make in my time speaking with you. The first one is that my felt experience of the Rethink initiative that Sequant just described was really about moving our organizational culture from one of fear and dread to one of excitement about possibility. And so I want to share with you a little bit about that. And then the other thing I'd like to share is how we use structured innovation processes, including design thinking and holistic innovation in our program design, and how after using that in Rethink, those methods and strategies have been disseminated across the university, and we have a somewhat common language, definitely common processes for designing with the student at the center. First of all, I want to take
Talk
you
about
all.
this fear thing a little bit. I
Yeah.
think everyone wants to know what you're talking about.
Oh, I'm so glad to talk about fear because, it's exciting. If we go back to fall of 2012, the year of the MOOC, according to the New York Times, everybody remembers that. And
The year of the crisis.
yeah, question mark. And we all were kind of presented at a particular meeting. Our provost actually showed a picture of, I think it was a guy in Mongolia or some beautiful place in the world who had completed something at Stanford and now could do network analysis. I can't remember. But, and the notion was that the power of the MOOC, this idea that access could now be across the world and free and effective and high quality content. And we all sat there at Portland State and said, gee, where's our value add? And I think we had some serious existential fear for our own mission and work. That was scary, and I will say a bit paralyzing. And of course, the media was also focusing a lot on this ROI question. Is it worth it? Should students get degrees? And I'm in a business school, and there were a few prominent business leaders suggesting that students not get an education and just get out in the world and learn by doing. So all these things, kind of led us to say, who are we and what's our value proposition? And how do we continue in these careers with a good conscience? And of course, you add on that the national problem of student debt. And it was, not a fun time, fall of 2012. And then came Rethink. And the way I experienced Rethink was, as a person interested in technology, all of a sudden there's a platform, an internet platform for us to start proposing ideas. And we were encouraged to put them up there in a very iterative way and look for comments and find collaborators and combine projects and comment on other people's projects. And we even had these public sessions where, all of a sudden got Twitter handles. I don't know if handle's the word, that's something else, but Twitter names, professional accounts. I am Innovate High Ed. That was my sort of big grandiose notion. And we started sharing ideas even in that setting and really using technology to talk about technology in innovative pedagogy. And I just, that and then the project management. So once we did start our projects, the idea that we were supported by pretty sophisticated project management tools meant that, and I hope I don't offend anyone, but a university institution was actually executing, so sorry. But sometimes that movement from theory and ideas to actual execution, there can be a gap. And in 2 years, we finished all of our Rethink projects, and we're very proud, and we feel sort of inordinately empowered that anything's possible. So I'm just telling you about my experience, but I have this kind of vision of us as a group at Portland State, hand in hand, faculty, students, staff, moving forward into a future that's filled with possibility instead of a kind of grim scenario. I think we have capacity now, and we know how to work together, and we have a lot of excitement around what we're doing. So the second thing I wanted to share was how we used innovation principles in our design and how that's been sort of spread out across campus. I know an innovation consultant in the Portland area, and when I got my project funded, I contacted him and said, would you like some pro bono work with the university? Because we want your tools for designing with students in mind. And I'm married to him, so he really had no choice. And he came and did a great job, if I do say so myself. And he guided us in many, many tools, but one was these listening sessions. And we brought in current students and prospective students. We also brought in industry employers, potential employers in different groups. And we worked with them to go through what we call a universe of possibilities. Those were all kinds of design requirements or design ideas. And we watched the students prioritize and move those design ideas around and rank them top to bottom. It's not really what they rank as high so much as the conversations that they use while they're talking about the trade-offs. So while they're moving free tuition from the top-ranked position, we thought that would be everybody's favorite, down below, and they're putting at the top effective instruction, they're talking about why free tuition isn't nearly as important to them as good teaching. And we listened to lots of these kinds of trade-offs. And what really struck me in listening to students time after time and having them surface these basic notions of teaching and learning was that we were capable of delivering. We didn't need bells and whistles. You know, we didn't need to give them free iPads. They weren't interested in free iPads. That dropped down pretty low. They wanted connection with faculty. They wanted faculty to know them when the course was over. And they wanted a kind of relational learning experience. So we got a lot of confidence about how to design the program, and I think we did a pretty good job. So these innovation processes got spread across campus, largely thanks to Saquant and his commitment to design thinking and to sort of working hard on the fuzzy front end of innovation. And it was actually horrible that about 6 weeks ago I said to a committee I was on, let's just do a quick student survey and just find out like what are their basic pain points and move on. And two of the members of the committee who are from far across campus from me said, Jeanne, we don't do quick surveys. We do listening sessions. We have processes that we use for innovation. I'm like, oh, okay, great. So came back to bite me. Anyway, I'm proud to be at Portland State. We had a shift in mindset. It's been very exciting to be a part of it, and thanks for listening to our story.
So it sounds like this started, though, as a little bit of a self-preservation exercise. Did you, or a self-justification exercise?
I think I teach ethics too, and so it's hard to think about perpetuating an institution that you're not sure is delivering. So I took those ROI articles very seriously, and I thought if you could get a free education from Stanford, in a MOOC, what are we doing? So I don't know. Am I alone in that sort of fear or sense that what we found, rather than really self-preservation for preservation's sake, I think, is that we have things to offer. I think MOOCs have an important place in the future, but I think our students also want these relationships, and they want to be invited into the community of knowledge, in a personal way. And that's it. Yeah.
Sarah?
Thanks, Goldie. Is this on? Yeah. Thanks for being here and listening and being interested in this. And I, too, am faculty. I'm now the program director for the Masters in Social Work at Portland State University, but prior to that, I, 17 years, was teaching faculty. And what I'm going to talk about is our Rethink project and how I think in a very, very short period of time, there's been an impact of the Rethink process on capacity within our institution, as well as an increase in access to a graduate social work education, which is what I'm going to talk about, because our Rethink project was to take our Masters of Social Work, which has been at Portland State for 50 years. We have a Masters of Social Work, we have a PhD, and we have 2 undergraduate programs. And it was to take our Masters of Social Work and put it online. Now, some of you may think, well, that's a no-brainer, but in social work, there was a very, very lively debate about whether it was actually possible and ethical to deliver an online social work education. Social work education is based on a competency-based set of skills that are all embedded in relationships between social workers and individuals and families and communities. And so there were only, in 2013, there were less than 10 online Masters of Social Work programs, and that really reflected the feeling in the community that it may not be possible or ethical to do it. And so when Rethink came around, I was in the same MOOC lecture that Jeanne was, and yet there were 2 of us that were really, really wanting to improve access to the Masters of Social Work. We tend to be a pretty white profession, and some of that is because we're not accessible to low-income communities of color. And so there were a couple of us that the Rethink process was like, oh my gosh, this is a possibility for us to try this. Really, we didn't know what we were doing. Neither of us had ever developed an online course. And so the two of us put in a proposal. It was not mandated. In fact, when we put our proposal in, our dean didn't even know we'd done it. We just went ahead and did it. He supported it afterward, and we ended up having, we actually got the grant, and I remember looking at my colleague and saying, oh my goodness, I didn't realize we were going to get it. And so then over 2 years, 5 core faculty. There were 2 of us that proposed this, 3 other faculty joined us. So 5 core faculty, 1 Portland State instructional designer and 1 Portland State course builder. We designed and developed 21 online courses to be able to offer our Masters of Social Work online. The social work faculty were the content experts. So we did not go outside the university to vendors who had the content. We took our unique content that's specific to our program, to our region, and we developed the 21 courses for our students. And again, it really reflects our content. And then the instructional designers and the builders, they brought the instructional pedagogy. For those of you that don't know, most of us that are faculty have never been taught to build curriculum. We sort of think, oh, I have to deliver this content, and then we find the textbook or we find the articles and we deliver the content. Well, the instructional designers really actually took us through how do you actually develop curriculum. Those people who know K through 12 know how to do curriculum development, but most higher ed faculty don't. So for us, this was a huge learning curve. And I remember being incredibly frustrated and yet incredibly inspired because what we were focusing on were the competency outcomes, not the knowledge base in. And so the instructional designers worked really carefully with us to develop content, which we then began delivering in fall of 2014. We have a 3-year online MSW program. All of the courses are taught by core faculty or core adjuncts. So we have the standard sort of percentages of adjuncts, and they signed on to the process, developed content with us. So all of our courses are taught by our core faculty. We did not hire outside online faculty experts. We had a strong commitment to strong virtual relationships between students and faculty and our advising model, and I think that's contributed to a 95% retention rate, which in online learning is quite high. We also had a commitment to put a TA in every single course, partially to address the fear factor. We had a lot of faculty who said, I don't want to do this, I can't do this, it's impossible to do this in social work. So we built in a TA model where we have a 1-credit TA teaching with us in order to actually have them understand how online learning is different and that the outcomes are as good, and be able to have them get over the fear factor. The transformational part of what we've done on an institutional level is when Rethink PSU started and Jeannie's project and my project were funded, the instructional design unit, which is called the Office of Academic Innovation, was very, very much in its developmental phase. So all of these projects, working with the instructional designers and with that department, actually influenced each other so that now we have a really strong instructional design capacity within the university that understands the structural nature of our university, the barriers, and how to work with faculty and be able to see faculty as the content experts to sort of have a marriage in developing online content. And that's now being used throughout the university for the next wave of projects. Finally, on a program level, we were able to increase admission by 20%, and I had a slide, but I couldn't show you slides, that showed how access actually improved. Our online students are more diverse. They are actually socioeconomically less privileged, and because we are a rural, have to serve our rural community, even though we're an urban serving university, we have a statewide mandate. It's really increased access. We've provided more flexibility for our students to move between our campus program, our online program, and our distance satellites for them to be able to get what they need in terms of their education. As in the faculty outcomes, as a result of those of us that have done this and realizing that the outcomes are no different than campus, the excitement that we have about how to use technology, we now have 10 more faculty who are currently designing new courses or teaching courses in our online program. We've expanded our course offerings in the Masters of Social Work program, and our undergraduate Bachelors of Social Work faculty have now actually been funded through the next wave to take the Bachelor's of Social Work online. So the idea that two of us started with this vision of it's possible has really transformed it with our core faculty, who really were quite resistant, skeptical, fearful about where we were going with this. Oh, and the TA model has really helped them to understand what it's like to teach online. So I talked to my colleagues around the country where many of them are teaching involuntarily. They're told you have to teach this online course. All of our faculty are teaching voluntarily, developing voluntarily, and coming to us because we now are resources within the faculty about how do you actually deliver a technology-enhanced learning experience. So I hope that's exciting to you. It's been phenomenally exciting to me. I've been in education a long time, and it's really exciting to begin to see a paradigm shift about how do we actually offer quality education and access.
I wonder, what was the decision process about why not going for an outside provider? You could have gotten these courses up a lot quicker. You probably could have you still used a lot of your own content. You certainly could have used that model.
We were very wedded to our content,
But you could have used your content and just used them for
when we
instructional
talked to
design.
outside providers, it became clear that we were going to be asked to use their textbooks. We were going to be asked to actually use what was already developed, and I think it's twofold. One is our faculty very much own what they've done and wanted to make sure that everything was mirrored what was on campus. For accreditation purposes, it had to be identical. And also, I think in terms of doing it, I felt like I wanted to learn how to do it so that I could then be able to explain to faculty, it's doable, you can bring your own content, you can actually make the outcomes as good. So for us, it was about ownership of faculty of the content.
And capacity.
And capacity, yeah.
Yeah.
And we didn't want to share the revenue, I will say.
Yeah, that's,
Thank you.
that's enough, I forgot that
Let's
piece.
do it real quick because I know we have to get the next group up.
Sure thing. And from my perspective, it wouldn't be transformational work because it'll focus on short-term gains. So building institutional capacity in the long term is absolutely essential to address disruptive challenges. And you won't be doing that if you were outsourcing that work.
Great. All
Thank
right.
you.
Let's give it up for Team FIU. I mean, Team
PSU.
Portland State. We're going to bring on FIU.
Oof. Low.
Oh, you guys move fast. Okay.
Yeah. Let's go.
We got script sheet here. Team FIU. To my left, Mark Rosenberg, President. Who's next?
Yeah.
Sat Gavasa Basara,
Yeah.
if I'm saying that right? Yes. Who is the professor in the Department of Biology, and Randy Just, who's a student and a learning assistant. We're going to learn a little bit about the ecosystem of improvements that they've done at FIU.
You ready? Okay, so
Take
I just want to do a full disclosure. It's 3 o'clock. I'm from Miami, and I need my Cuban coffee. Is there Cuban coffee in the house? Probably not. So I'll survive without it. I want to thank Peter and Mark and APLU and USU for this gathering and for inviting us. We're, as Goldie mentioned, I'm accompanied by Randy Just, who is a senior. He's a chemistry major. He's getting ready to graduate. He's a graduate of Miami-Dade County Public Schools. And Sad Gervasa Becerra, who's an immigrant in Miami. There are a few, as you know. And she's from Columbia. She was educated there and did her graduate work at FIU. She's a biologist. We're probably here because we've moved our graduation rate from about 41% to 57% in 5 years. And we've done that in the context of significant growth of our institution. We've grown by about 14,000 students intentionally during that time. And when we started this process, we had just taken a $60 million hit to our base budget, or really about a third of our base budget had been cut, as a consequence of the difficulties that we all went through. Today we're 54,800 students. and we're a public university. About 80%, over 80% of our students are minorities, 70% are Hispanics, about half Cuban Americans, half from the rest of the region, 12 to 13% are Africa diaspora. We're going to graduate 12,800 students this year. 65% of our graduates will be Pell grantees, and at least 40% are first generation. We are, in addition to the growth of our enrollment, in the last 5 years we've hired 500 new faculty, of whom 230 have been replacements and 270 have been new. We're Carnegie Research 1, and during this same period, our faculty have moved from about 32% of our faculty on external support to now 52%. So we have been able to improve the learning environment. We have maintained access to eligible students, and we've also deepened our ability to be competitive in the research arena. Let me spend a moment on our philosophy. And I must say that I liked Mark Becker's point about intensity and intentionality. And what I would characterize our approach is intense intentionality and intense clarity. And basically, we obsess on impact at FIU. We see ourselves as a solutions center for the community. We don't talk much about rankings, we talk about impact. We think that's 21st century. We think that's more forward-facing. We think that's more consistent with the fiduciary that we have for our community. And we understand that we have a sacred obligation to our students to ensure that they get a high-quality education, they graduate timely, and they are exposed to the opportunity to either get good jobs or to take good jobs. Because the 21st century is very much about the ability of our students not just to take that job, but to create that good job. And if you know our governor, you know that he really does obsess on job creation, and that is the foundation for our governor. And we, of course, will ultimately reflect that aspect of the public policy arena in which we operate. We deeply believe in win-win partnerships. We think that's very, very important. We think it's important to blur the lines wherever possible. And we have continued to emphasize seamlessness. One of the challenges that I think we confront as urban institutions and public institutions at that is that we don't view the education system as in its continuity. We don't see it in terms of the entirety of the flow of the pathway. And as a consequence, it makes it difficult, as Sue Quant had pointed out, to have something that is systemic, that is institutional, because we don't really take the time to work with and in our community. Now, in our case, we're really lucky because we have two systems that are good and comprehensive. First is our public education system, which is a unified school system, 340,000 students, the fourth largest in the United States. So we don't have 6 or 7 school boards that we got to work with. We have one, and we have a very progressive superintendent who has excelled in maintaining the quality and integrity and enhancing it of public education, won national prizes, and improved the graduation rates significantly. We also work very directly with another partner, the Miami-Dade College, which is a very large state college, community college, the largest in Florida, and one of the largest, if not the largest, in the United States. And we benefit from having seamless articulation, common course numbering throughout the state university system and the community college system, which facilitates transfer students. We take 9,000 transfer students a year. About 3,500 of them are from Miami-Dade College. And let me point out that, this is an era when the grim weapons of hostility, of venality, of difference, of anger predominate. But the urban public institutions, in many ways, are very much about the bright weapons of hope and of opportunity. And I think that's what you hear here amongst us today and why this issue is so important, because day after day, if the needle's going to be moved in this country, it will be the urban public institutions, particularly if we're to close the opportunity gaps, the education gaps, and the income gaps. That's very much what we are about. There are a number of initiatives that we have taken, and I want to try to identify 5 very quickly, and then we'll turn it over to our speakers. Because we see the issue of the pathway as a continuum that doesn't just start with the freshman year, but really begins with pre-K and then goes through 12, our approach is it focuses first on a very strong partnership with Miami-Dade County Public Schools through a unit that we've created called Access, Achieving Community Coordination for Education and Student Success. When I served as provost at FIU, my belief was that the relationship with the public schools was the domain of the dean of the College of Education, and how wrong I was. And so one of the lessons that I understood when I came back as president, that the relationship with the public schools is so important that it really starts at the top of the institution. And if the president isn't committed and understands that, you can't expect the vice presidents and the deans. So the superintendent and I came together, and we have a working group of 150 specialists from the 2 institutions, his deputy superintendents, our vice presidents, our deans, his school principals, and then the functional leads. We have 4 different thematic groups working across 18 committees, all focused on student achievement. How can we accelerate student achievement? And there have been a number of outputs from that. The most consequential is that we do dual enrollment, about 8,000 instances of dual enrollment across 35 high schools. There's a total of 46 in Dade County, but across 35 high schools that we sponsor. And it gives the students credit not just towards their high school degree, but towards college in the state of Florida. And more importantly, our estimate is that this year we will save students going into college, if they should choose to go to Florida, about $4 million in tuition, which is not inconsequential for a community that has the 3rd poorest income, has the 3rd highest income inequality in the United States, which is Miami. We also have deeply embedded in a number of lower performing inner city high schools. And we've done that in a program called the Education Effect in partnership with J.P. Morgan Chase and with Lennar Homes. The purpose is to improve college readiness and career readiness for students who otherwise might not believe that there's hope. And I want to tell you a quick story about that. Because we have performance funding in the state, it obviously presents a dilemma for us that for a university that is urban metropolitan, to admit eligible students at risk puts performance on the other side, retention, graduation rate. It increases the likelihood that that's going to be more difficult. When I raised that with the Speaker of the House a couple of years ago, his comment to me was, Mark, you know, I don't really share your view. I don't subscribe to the soft bigotry of low expectations.
The speaker would have been?
Weatherford.
Oh, not Rubio.
And no, not Marco Rubio. I'm not, Goldie, you can't do that to me. Yeah, Goldie. So sorry to disappoint you.
He was a speaker.
Yes, he was. And you know, but my response to that was this: look, I want to be in those 46 high schools, not because I have low expectations, but because I have high expectations for what those students are doing and should be doing. So access is critical to create that seamlessness that we are fundamentally committed to. We also have initiated a graduate success initiative. And that graduation success initiative has numerous components to it. First of all, we have restructured our requirements on majors. Every student has to declare a major or an exploratory major, and there is appreciative, strong, focused advising that is proactive. I use the word appreciative and strong. In another venue, I might say there's intrusive advising. In other words, we track the students from the get-go so that we can help them avoid issues. We have, in that graduate success initiative, hired 70 new professional advisors, most with master's degrees, so that indeed every student for when they arrive has an advisor they know they can work with. The third thing we've done is that we have worked hard to make sure that our faculty understand that they have to restructure the curriculum. That the old days of the weed out courses, that getting students out of the system was no longer acceptable, inconsistent with our fiduciary, inconsistent with the debt that the students were taking on, inconsistent with the notion that eligible students are there but anything other than to learn and to graduate. And we have used the Transformation Planning Grant to work with students, with our faculty to identify 17 bottleneck courses, accounting for 41,000 instances of enrollment, 10% of our student credit hours right there. And we are restructuring those courses together with our faculty. It's a system-wide initiative to ensure that students have a significant chance of completing that course the first time around. And let me tell you something. We have taken out faculty who don't get that. Now, what that means is we have given them a chance to retool, to rethink, and to understand how critical it is that the center of responsibility be shared between the student and the faculty. And I'm happy to tell you that the truth is there's been a great deal of understanding of that and support for that amongst our colleagues. We're going to talk about that in a minute. We've also added a significant number of learning assistants and active learning techniques. Learning assistants are critical because that's peer-to-peer, and increasingly in the 21st century, we know that significant learning gains can be accomplished in peer-to-peer work. So what I want to do is ask my two colleagues to spend some time with us. Randy first on the issue of learning assistants and what our learning assistants do and why they're important, and then Sat to talk about curriculum and course restructuring.
Thank you, President Rosenberg. My name is Randy Just. I am a senior at FIU. I'm a chemistry major, and I'm a learning assistant for the Department of Mathematics and Statistics. And as a learning assistant, or LA, as we call ourselves, I work for the Math Mastery Lab at FIU, where students who are taking college and intermediate algebra and finite math, they come to the lab to study, to work on homework or quizzes, and to prepare for exams. So our lab is staffed with around 30 LAs, and these LAs were able to work with students one-on-one and give each of the students personalized attention. The lab is open from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. So each of the students are able to stay for as long as they'd like and working on problems and asking for help if they need it. In addition to the time that our students spend in the lab, they meet once a week in hour-long sessions of around 10 to 15 students that we call math gyms. The math gyms, it's the perfect name because it's just like going to the gym, except for your brain. You know, our students, they work with they work with learning assistants like myself and other students, and they practice teaching and explaining the material to one another and working on problems. And one of the great things about the math gym is that the students have an opportunity to open up to one another. So they have, in math gyms, it creates an environment where students can talk about any of the material that they're struggling with in the course, or they have access to places where they can find help for the material. So these math gyms, they're like study groups, but our students are the ones who get to choose the study group. They pick a gym day and time that works for them and fits into their busy schedules. Frankly, at FIU, I don't know anyone who isn't working at least part-time. So the ability for our students to choose a study group that works for them really works for the students at our university. In addition to all of this, our students benefit so much from the Learning Assistant Program, but I reap so many benefits from being in LA. For starters, I have an on-campus job in my field, so I don't have to pick up a part-time job in hospitality or in retail. And for those of you who know anything about Miami, I don't have to drive through an hour of traffic to get to work. So it's really convenient for me to be able to plan my studies around work and be able to have a job that makes ends meet. In addition to this, I've always loved math, But by being in LA, I've realized that I love teaching. It's really rewarding for me to be able to meet with students, to interact with them, to speak with them. And by being a math gym instructor, I've had the opportunity to build relationships with students that have lasted after the semester that I taught them. So it's been great to have these kinds of relationships with students. And in addition to this, we learning assistants, we meet with department faculty every week to plan our material and to kind of anticipate the types of problems that students might be struggling with. So we look at the material that we're going to be teaching the students the following week, and we work on problems and we try to guess what it is that students might have trouble working on. By being a learning assistant, I have strengthened my own understanding of the material, and by thinking through a lot of the roadblocks that students face, I've had to consider my own understanding and how it is that I know what it is that I know. It's been really good and it's been really helpful for making me a better student. I've learned how to better prepare for my classes. I've learned how to become a better studier, and it's just been such a help to my academic career. For me, this all started in a learning assistant classroom where I was first exposed to LAs and to the active learning model. And I know that Professor Gavasa Becerra is very reliant upon her learning assistants, and she's very passionate about active learning. So I'll pass the mic to you.
Randy, before you do that, just what kind of training did you have to become a LA?
Sure. The semester that we're all hired, all LAs get to take a kind of an education course at FIU called the Learning Assistant Seminar. So within this seminar, the whole semester we're going over teaching techniques, and we get to work with faculty who are very passionate about active learning, who prepare us on some of the best ways to approach students, how to speak to them, how to guide them through problems, and how to really just really help them understand the material and how they can better study and focus on the things that they need to do. So in addition to that, every week when we're meeting with the faculty, they help us out. They really teach us some of the best ways that we can speak to students and explain some of the things that they need to understand.
And that seminar was for credit?
Yes, that seminar is for credit.
Great.
Thank you, Randy. So learning assistants like Randy have been crucial for the transformation that we're sharing here today. I teach General Biology 1, which is one of the 17 courses identified as gateway courses that President Rosenberg was telling us. These are courses that are introductory classes, have very large enrollment, and low passing rates. So they are strong predictors of students graduating in a timely manner. And these courses include things like lower division math classes, my biology course, and things like first year of writing. And these courses were intended to open the world to the students' field, and instead they're acting as gatekeepers. They're acting as barriers weeding out students. And we just couldn't take that. So this is just not ethical, as you were saying. So we had to change. In 2009, FIU started working in college algebra, which is one of the most feared courses in other institutions as well. And the transformation there set the example. The passing rates went from 30% to 70%. So in 2014, with support from APLU and USU and the Transformational Planning Grant, we identified all these other 17 courses, and we started the ambitious task of transforming all of them. So as you can imagine, that's not easy, and one of the challenges was convincing the faculty of the need for reform. We had to change the culture, as we've been talking before, and change the conversation from what is wrong with my students who aren't passing my classes to what can I do in my class to ensure that my students pass. And if you know faculty, we don't like to be told what to do.
I've heard that.
But when it comes to how we should teach, the research has been out for a long time. We learn deeply when we engage actively in the content. So we have to bring more active learning into our classroom. And it took many seminars and workshops and discussions and a lot of support from university resources like the Center for the Advancement of Teaching, the STEM Transformation Institute, and their HHMI Scholar Program to embark on this transformation and have the professional development and logistical support to carry it on. And the good thing is all the time we spent working and transforming our courses, we started building a community. So the faculty like me who teach gateway courses, we've been collaborating And we've been building that critical mass that you need for pedagogical reform. So now that we have the faculty on board, now we have to bring the students along.
Can you stop for a second? What's different? What's different about your class now than it would have been 5 years ago before you reform? How is it different?
It's completely different. First, I would be lecturing, because as faculty, most of us were taught in lecture courses, and that's what we know. That's the system that we know. Now my classes are only active learning, so there is very little lecturing, and the lecturing happens mostly online, so students are doing the passive learning before they come to class, and then in class they're working with learning assistants like Randy in case studies and problem sets, and also building their study groups. So now they know someone. Before, they used to be in a class with 400 other students, and even though they were surrounded by all these students, they didn't know anybody to study with. So now they have their teams that they study outside of class as well.
Are there bio gyms too?
Sort of. We have a similar thing. It's our PLTL, peer-led team learning, which works similar to the math gym. So the students also needed to be convinced, because now they had to have a more active role in the classroom, and they needed to see the value of doing that. But this also got easier as more faculty have been transforming their courses, and students are hearing the same message about active learning in their various classes. And we know it works. We saw it in college algebra, and we're seeing it in my class. I've seen passing rates go up by 20 points, almost 20 points. So this success of the active learning classrooms and their growing numbers have justified the creation of seminars like where learning assistants are trained, like Randy was saying. And also, we're building active learning classrooms so that we can have more active learning environments. And the lesson we have here is improving student success is a complex issue. And as the president has mentioned, we have to tackle it from many angles. And real institutional transformation needs to engage all the three pillars of the academic life: the students, the faculty, and the administration, coming together as partners in the reform. So I'll pass that to President Rosenberg for the
Go ahead.
You alluded to the governor before, and I think we can't let Florida walk away without talking a little bit about the incentives that hang over you as an institution that you're also responding to.
Well, the incentives are now
demands, let's put it
completely front-loaded on through performance funding, on raising the graduation rate, raising the retention rate, reducing time to degree, and so the only incremental funding that we get now in the state of Florida is based upon basically that output. And the institutions are basically the 12 institutions of public higher education, universities, basically compete against each other.
So it's zero sum.
And it's zero sum. So the allocation, the appropriation, some of it will be incremental, but the rest of it will be reallocation. And if you're in the bottom three, you're going to get your funding reallocated. And so, nothing focuses a mind like a hanging in the morning. And this is the metaphorical equivalent of a hanging in the morning. So for instance, my evaluation as president, we just decided that my evaluation would be largely based upon our performance on those performance indicators. Not exclusively, but mostly. And that individual departments in the university, we know and they know now what their retention rate is, what their graduation rate is, and they understand that they're expected to have an improvement strategy which places the emphasis on student success. And truthfully, there has been I would say that there has been an understanding about why that's important. And it coincides with the whole conversation on student debt, that we do have an obligation to find a way to timely graduate our eligible students. And in our case, we're lucky. We've been able to grow and at the same time, with eligible qualified students, and at the same time raise the graduation rate. So that our faculty in our last strategic planning, which our new strategic plan, basically told us that we should grow to 65,000 students. When I thought it would be going in a different direction, but they are they get that model and they're willing to take responsibility for the challenges ahead, which I think is a good sign for us as an institution, and also evidence that people who work in urban public institutions understand that their mission in part has to be focused on their demography, and that you can't avoid your demography if you're going to have a sustainable education model.
And Seth, how much does the political environment does the faculty willingness to redesign these courses and to sort of accept, that maybe sounds bad, to embrace the course redesign? How much of that is influenced by the political environment? Do faculty get it?
I think the faculty are mostly influenced by their own ethical responsibility. As educators, we have our goal is to educate as many of the students as possible. And I think the challenge has been not so much the political environment, but understanding how to do it. Because as we said, we've been doing lecture, that's what we know. So
But clearly something triggered, I mean, it wasn't just the political environment, it was the broader political environment too, but something, the faculty were doing the old model for a lot of years, and they were no less ethical then.
I think the biggest change, the biggest factor has been seeing other people starting doing it and having big results. So that's what has been pushing others to do it more than anything else.
But I think in the case of our university, the advent of discipline-based education research coming through our Department of Physics and really having a serious leadership role in rethinking STEM education. It started in 98, 99. So it was as much grassroots. And then as discipline-based education research has spread, it has shown that that learning becomes a significant responsibility and a serious challenge that heretofore really we haven't been thinking that much about. And so I think it does very much come from the faculty. There's a political overlay, no doubt, but that's what, if you're going to be in public education, you need to be ready for that.
Great. Well, great. Team FIU, good job.
Thank you. Okay. I'll put Mark right here.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, this is terrific. Let me start off with, I want to join, actually, channel Peter McPherson as well as myself and everybody else here to thank Sherry Garmise for pulling all this together. Yeah. Sherry's leadership at Urban Serving Universities. But you beat me to it. And her team. She has an incredible team. We're very fortunate as Urban Serving Universities to have such a strong team and such strong support from Sherry, her team, and an APLU, an important partner of USU. I also would be remiss if I didn't thank the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. You've heard the transition planning grants mentioned a number of times. These institutions are recipients of those funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. So we're very thankful to them as well for their support. Now what I want to do is start and then go to some questions. But I want to start with some themes that I think I heard here and repeat those for you. The first theme that you should take away from this is the needle is moving. The needle is moving, particularly in retention and graduation rates, numbers of graduates from these urban institutions. And you heard Mark Rosenberg say 41 to 57%, I believe, in roughly 5 years. And my institution's similar, 32 to 54%, but I bet at your institution and UIC and Portland State and all the others, if you actually get the clearinghouse data, you'd find your graduation rates of the students you admitted to probably be in the 70 to 80% range by the time you take those who've transferred. And transfer is not unusual in the United States of America. No. To put that in context, these institutions, which are serving some of the most challenged, economically challenged first-generation students, are actually graduating at higher rates at these institutions than is the national average. Fall after fall, only half the people that start college actually graduate within 6 years. So to be able to beat that with challenged environments, the needle is moving. That's what you've heard from all three of these institutions. And that's why this is an exciting time. And it's all about institutional transformation. That's the second theme. That you've heard it again and again from UIC, from Portland State, from FIU about institutional transformation. I actually loved, I think you said it was the speaker, we have to break the tyranny of low expectations. Meaning this work that you're hearing about is very recent. It's within the last 12 to 24 months that people have actually started to believe that you could break the tyranny of low expectations and achieve the kind of success you're hearing about. It was in this city about 3 years ago when I was giving a keynote address at a National Science Foundation meeting, actually on education and biology of all things, which I don't know about because I'm a math nerd like your student. Thank you very much. But for some reason they asked me to come talk about what we were doing at our institution in this area. And I was told by the audience in the Q&A that it is not possible to move this needle because so many institutions have tried for so long and hadn't been successful. That's why what you're hearing today from UIC, from Portland State, from FIU, and from all the urban serving institutions that have come together to collaborate and coordinate around this theme, that it is possible in a time when the tyranny of low expectations has been with us for too long. The other piece that I'd say you heard from these panels, at least I heard it, is the importance of doing experiments. For too long in higher education, and we heard it from your biology professor, well, we did what we did because that's the way it had always been done. But now you find institutions that are looking inside themselves and they're transforming. You heard it again and again about institutional transformation, and at the heart of that is doing experiments, actually practicing what we preach. Every year, every semester, we teach the scientific method. But we're now subjecting ourselves to the scientific method instead of assuming because we're a bunch of PhDs that we know the answer and it's going to be right. Because we're a bunch of PhDs that thought we knew the answers and we had met the tyranny of low expectations. But then, actually I want to channel one more, I got a couple of quotes I want to channel from this. In the experiments, I think we heard from Portland State, let you know how much of an experiment it was. We did not know what we were doing. I think that's the quote of the day. But the result is good. That's what the experiments are about, to actually find out where the truth lies. And then we heard from FIU here at the end, what we were doing was not ethical. What is ethical is if we admit students, we expect them, and they should graduate. Unfortunately, that has not been the culture of higher education heretofore across the country. And that's what this change is all about. But then that leads me to some questions. And the first question for this panel was actually one Goldie you asked in the UIC panel. And that's the importance of scale. How do you achieve scale within your institutions? And then how do we achieve scale across our institutions? So how do you grow from being able to mentor 102 students to being able to provide every single student, the tens of thousands? You're going to 65,000, I think you heard. Can you make sure?
And can I tweak that question a little bit? Because it occurred to me listening to UIC, and a lot of these presentations, a lot of these are, except for the course redesign, a lot of these are kind of add-on projects, things that, hiring bringing in a bottom line or all these other organizations to do counseling, that costs money. What's the model for sustaining this once the grant runs out?
I think what you see happening, I think everybody should chime in on this, you see a number of experiments taking place at different institutions. So you heard the UIC experiment. I'm sure Portland State has their own models they're working on, FIU. And actually, one of the things we're going to do at our Urban Serving Universities meeting this summer is actually talk about these issues of how do we actually collaborate to achieve scale across our institutions.
Well, you're absolutely right. Scaling is a difficult challenge, to say the least, because we have a tendency to begin things on a small scale, see how effective they are, and not always thinking about how the most effective programs can be scaled up. And one of the reasons for that is related to resources. Now, one of the beauties of something like the transition coaching program that we have is that there are any number of external organizations which engage in these types of practices. So the way to scale up is to actually incorporate more of them into your planning. However, that sort of begs the question of how do you maintain that? Because the external organizations are very dependent on their funding relations, to say the very least. So one has to sort of create a balance between what you are able to do externally and what you're able to do internally. I hate to say it, but UIC is at a bit of a disadvantage at this point, largely because we don't have a budget.
Not for about a year now, right?
That's right. And And it's an interesting situation. Fortunately, unlike other of the universities in Illinois, we at least have a reserve, and the way our revenues is distributed keeps us more than afloat. Nevertheless, if we were to, as an example, want to significantly expand transition coaching using our own staff, which would assure actually the continuity, we'd be hard pressed to do this at this point. We plan and we keep our fingers crossed.
So Quan, you're all about design thinking. So if you were to take on this problem with a design thinking perspective, how would you approach it?
Well, for us, I would say it's not only a question of scale, it is also a question of speed. Because the external environment is changing incredibly rapidly, and you must respond to it with great intensity and with great degree of speed. So for us, working on the short-term solution that keeps us successful right now to have the students and make sure they're graduating, as well as building the institutional capacity so you can innovate over time. My colleagues talked about it from their perspective. But in our case, we abolished units on campus, like our Center for Academic Excellence built 20 years ago, Center for Online Learning built 20 years ago, and actually built new unit, Office of Academic Innovation, with a very different kind of concept about how innovation takes place.
I wondered about that. That's sort of, when you described that to me earlier, I thought, oh, they got rid of units. And then I thought, they created a new unit. And it just, what did they change?
Well, they changed the mindset. So it's online learning is not some standalone thing that happens. As students' learning patterns changes, faculty's interests change, you have to embed it in how learning takes place on campus. And I think that's an important point. So it's not simply a name change, it's a fundamental change in the nature in which the university supported faculty in teaching and learning. I think that's an important part. Secondly, building platforms that allow us to innovate. So project management has been a very important part of it. I'm trained as an architect. I know how to build great buildings, and we have used that for supporting large-scale curricular projects. We talked about 2 projects. Provost Challenge, the project we have finished, had 24 projects like this in it. And right now, in the pipeline, we have different kinds of innovation streams. So you're looking at some of the best approaches in the innovation domain. We are looking at external experts. We have gone out and hired people who can help us think about how to structure innovation on campus and using it in a very structured way. We also experience the power of working together. What happens when 1,000 people submit ideas and work together in one form or the other? At the same time, as a follow-up from that, what happens if you open it up and invite, we have 28,000 students. What if you invite students into this space and let them submit ideas and help and draw on their power to co-create as well to help each other? You heard about mentoring, but it can take place in a variety of forms, from generation of ideas to prioritizing things to simply not having to use certain kinds of services university offers currently, because you can do those things easily on your own.
I was wondering that. A lot of these solutions have a peer mentoring component in them, and obviously that's a sustainability model because, I mean, well, at some point you might have to pay some of these students to do some of these things, but you don't have to pay them at the rate of a professional. But are there some limits to, I mean, we haven't even begun to explore the opportunities with of using students and peer mentoring ideas, but
well, no,
how far does that go?
I think you heard it in the FIU model. We do likewise with we call them high DFW courses. Instead of being an airport code, it's Ds, Fs, and withdrawals. The same thing, but you have to target where you're going to have the greatest impact. Comes back to a scale issue. I mean, you only have so many resources. You're going to target that at intensive mentoring, peer mentoring, and you're going to head first for the courses where you have the greatest bottlenecks or barriers to progress. And I think that's becoming fairly quickly spread around the country.
And how about in categories of activities? Are there some places where students it's really appropriate to use the student peer model? Are there some places where it just doesn't work?
I haven't, that's a good question. I haven't found areas intuitively where it's not a good idea. But let's understand the broader trend. I mean, our economy is moving towards the notion of a shared economy.
Right.
That's a huge trend in most urban areas. And so why shouldn't we, as a learning community, figure out how to be more aggressive in sharing the learning experience? And my humanities faculty are continually worried about, and the social science faculty are continually worried about the STEM exercise. And I'm not worried about that because we know, those of us who have been around for a while, that that eventually that spotlight's going to move to humanities because somebody's going to wake up and recognize that civic education is critical for the sustainability of democracy. And so my point to, for instance, my humanities faculty is learn as much as you can now from the innovations that are taking place in STEM because the spotlight will be on you shortly. And so, for instance, how do you get papers graded? How do you get papers evaluated when you have mass English classes, because of the issues of reduction in efficiencies? There are learning assistants who can be very helpful in that mix, so the full burden is not on graduate students and on dwindling graduate students, I should say, and on faculty.
Well,
we just have to think out of the box a lot more about that.
And to that end, we've done peer mentoring in history courses in that model. And we've actually done some of the experiments in English where students are actually grading each other. And actually, it's a way of crowdsourcing that information. Because you actually, not only do you learn by writing, but you also learn by reading other people's writing.
Do we want to take some questions from the audience? Are we set up for
I
that?
think we have some microphones. Yes, we do.
Can you identify yourself also?
Sure, I'm Pamela Barnett. I'm Dean of Arts and Sciences at Trinity Washington University here in DC. I'm very encouraged by the emphasis on faculty development. I'm always thinking that, students may or may not go to the Writing Center or see their advisor regularly, but hopefully they're at least going to class, and they should be taught by someone who knows something about how people learn and how to design a course to meet significant learning goals. So I love that. I'd like to know if and how your institutions are building in this expectation for research-based teaching practices into the reward structures, for instance, tenure and promotion criteria.
I can tell you we're not doing it very well. It's the discipline-based education research is still something that is evolving. We are basically making sure that the traditional academicians understand that the DBER is a very legitimate basis upon which to get tenure and promotion. And that's a hard lesson for a lot of faculty. And in part, we understand that because we spend so much time, at least in our case, emphasizing the importance of cutting-edge research, emphasizing the importance of generating new knowledge on the edge of the discipline, that the notion that discipline-based research on learning could be legitimate is still, it's a hard sell. But as soon as we get into more intrusive learning measures, intrusive measures of cognition, and then their disciplines are going to scurry as fast as they can to DBER, because whether you're in political science or your ability to have your students learn will be a measure that is visible nationally, instantaneously, with that learning process. And we're all going to be compared. And then I promise you, DBER is going to take off.
Yeah, I'd say we lead that change positively rather than negatively. So you asked about the reward structure. The above and beyond salary and promotion and tenure, which are all important, faculty, like many people, like people to talk about what they're doing and why they're important and how they're successful. And that's the responsibility of the leaders of these institutions. And so we have to highlight those who are leading the way, such as Mark and Saquon and Manny brought faculty with them today. Yep. Okay, those positive reinforcements are some of the most important things we can do. And then there will be isolated cases, not as a president, but as a provost. I had a promotion to full file before me that the dean had recommended against because the research was in the education within the discipline as opposed to fundamental research within the discipline. And it didn't matter to the dean that this individual had acquired millions of dollars in NSF funding to be a pioneer in the discipline and education. And so I went against the dean and I promoted the individual. I mean, we have to be positive forces of change, both by holding up those positive cases and then putting our decisions where our mouth is, not just talking about it, but actually putting those rewards out there for the faculty.
But I think that Mark, that what you've heard is that we have found where our innovators are and our leaders are, and we've led with them.
Yep, you got to rise
Each of
up.
your institutions will have leaders and laggards, And this process can be led by the leaders if you will have the patience to identify them and to support them. And I think that's what you're hearing here, whether it's the individual projects, the 26 projects, or the faculty who are willing to work with the students that really need the assistance.
A provost once told me, I go where it's warm. But I also wonder at some point, does that just, does that point kind of create sort of a two-tiered thing and you don't get enough buy-in?
No, that's transition change.
Yeah, I mean, as it was shared by Sarah, it gets warmer over time, right? So now she has 11 colleagues who are now working with her, and initially 2 of them proposed, and 5 in the team, and then 11 more. And that's the story of one department. I mean, this work is happening across the university.
Another question? Thanks. And identify yourself.
Am I on? Yes. All righty. My name is Nicole Norris. I'm with the Council for Opportunity and Education. We advocate and provide professional development for TRIO programs, or the College Access and Success programs. My question is to what everyone's addressed, which is the issue of sustainability. And I think there's some benefit to everyone, but I used to live in Chicago, work with the foundation there, and so I know exactly what you mean. And the gentleman, it is the Sears Tower, yes.
Yeah.
But my question is and I wonder if everyone can answer. We are really trying to advance within the College Access and Success movement, TRIO programs in particular, the need to connect with the leadership. And there are 2 programs at your institution. There's Student Support Services that serve 250 programs, Upward Bound, pre-college program that works with students to get them into colleges, but they're based at UIC. And so my question is, how can, or what would be your suggestion for people who currently operate those programs that are on federal funds, so they don't have to go out, every 5 years, they've got to rewrite and make it competitive. But what would be your suggestion for them to tap into the leadership so that they can have more presence on the campus to help sustain the efforts that you've all started?
So you're referring to campus leadership. Is that the question?
At various campuses, but
Not just your campus, and then broadly, I think, also.
Well, it's not as difficult as it often might seem.
By definition, if it seems difficult, it's difficult.
Well, but the question is, can it be resolved or not? The organization leadership can have access to higher levels of leadership within the institution. At UIC, I don't see that as a major problem, at least as it exists currently. One could start, for instance, with me. Let me give that an example. And moving from there, depending on what the concerns and the issues are, and the recognition of the importance of what is going on, move that to the next level, which would be to the provost or the chancellor, as that seems appropriate. One needs to know the specific issues that need to be resolved. And a lot of this sometimes has to do with awareness. Some of my experiences, we have some very good programs, but they're virtually invisible. And there are components, for instance, of the TRIO program. We know it's there, but it sort of is in a siloed situation. That shouldn't be the case. So it's leadership at both sides that have a responsibility.
Yeah, I would just say that, that I want data. I want evidence that that program is going to provide students who are going to be successful. And I'm not too sure if I've ever seen TRIO data that have identified, what happens to those students who are in the program. Where do they go? What do they end up doing? And I think, to Mark Becker's point, that we need to celebrate the success, but we do need to tell the story better, and that begins with the better information that could lead us to understand why it's important. Intrinsically, we know it's important, but then in terms of the kind of imperatives that we have to move that needle, to get students in and out, how does that, what's the success rate of those programs? I couldn't tell you in our case, although I know we have really good people managing those programs, and I've met a lot of the students, but we need more granular information and storytelling that can help us to help you.
This actually leads me to a question I've been wondering about all along, and I'm sure as part of these grants you have evaluation processes, but is there something to evaluate what you're doing and see if it's working, but is there something that you've learned so far in the course of doing some preliminary evaluation that's useful to share with each other even?
Well, you have to be relentless in following the data. Mark just said it, and so what we look at TRIO programs, and my experience in a number of institutions is they tend to be siloed. But when you look at, so you have to look at the data. So actually following the data actually forces you to get out of doing small programs for tens of students or hundreds of students. I have 25,000 undergraduates. Everything we do, including intensive advising, is for 25,000 undergraduates. Now, what we can't do is a model like UIC's model because it's too expensive. So we actually have to leverage technology to follow all 25,000 students literally every day. And using technology, using predictive analytics, using a big data environment, using the average number of advisors for an institution of our size, not an upscaled number, not a unique set, able to intervene with every single student at the time at which there's some indication that he or she needs somebody to talk to him or her as a human being. So last year, for 25,000 students, there were 45,000 face-to-face meetings between advisors and advisees. This year, we're probably going to pass 50,000 such meetings. That's actually a different way, a different model. We got to rethink our models using design thinking, looking at the entire student experience. Now we've got data, because we've got 25,000 students in one program for every student, regardless of race, ethnicity, socioeconomic status, age, stage of life, whatever you want to talk about. That's the only way we're going to actually continue to move the needle so that we get from 30% to 40% to 50% to where we belong at 90%, like the most elite, most selective institutions are in a high-cost model. But the only way we can get there is at scale. And so and the only way we're going to be able to do that is to look at the data. And you can only have reliable data when you have enough of it.
So Goldie, let me ask Mark Becker a question.
No, that's not
I want
fair.
to put him on the spot.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, so because you're talking about data,
Yep.
and so you know that at Georgia State, you work with a select number of high schools.
Yep.
Do you have data across time on the graduation, on the retention and graduation rates of students from those high schools?
So we do actually track the schools where we get students from and how they do. Again, it's going to depend on the numbers coming from the schools as to whether they're not large enough or small enough. So we're actually right now in a new relationship with the Atlanta Public Schools, actually through a third-party intermediary funded by a foundation, to actually get much more intentional about the students coming specifically out of the Atlanta Public Schools. But then again, their geographies matter. Actually, you talked about our demographics matter, our geographies matter. For us, we're actually in a 13-county, Georgia has very small counties, a 13-county area. We got a lot of school systems, a lot of school districts, a whole bunch of school superintendents. So we're not going to be able to get the simplicity that Miami-Dade can bring to you because of the sheer size of Miami-Dade.
So if you know that, though, if you know more about schools, are there really things of importance you can do?
Well, what you can tell is when you go back to the admissions process, and again, that gives you information about likelihood of success. Yeah, absolutely. So you know that a GPA from this high school may mean something different than a GPA from that high school. And this has actually been going on in higher ed for a long time. I know that when I was a provost at another institution, we had such data and used it.
Well, go ahead. Sorry, no, go ahead.
In Chicago, the Chicago Public Schools have partnered now with a number of universities in the Chicago area under the Compact for Chicago Compact for Higher Education. And while it's still in process, it does involve a lot of sharing of data between the high school system and the universities in pinpointing where the shortcomings are, particularly on the high school end. And there's been a great deal of conversation, very positive. But like the rest of the state, CPS is having an administrative
and strive efforts where
they also
are.
don't have a budget, I think. Right.
But strive efforts, and strive was mentioned earlier,
yeah, right.
where they exist are very data-based. And the strive effort in Atlanta is young. Cincinnati is probably one of the most developed, but you seem to be a few years into it.
We're a few years into it, and a number of projects have emerged that are being incorporated in the high schools, which is really rewarding. Then we don't feel we're just going to meetings and spinning wheels, which is a problem, as most of us know.
This will probably be our last question, right?
Oh, good afternoon, Michelle Arancivi. I'm with Laureate Education. Kind of curious for all the panelists regarding any public-private partnerships. So I think of Straighter Line that's out there and has some disruptive models where you can do some undergraduate gen ed courses on your own pace or portfolio. We've had CLEP around for a million years, but in terms of pursuing that retention, progression, graduation goal, if they're public-private partnerships to get folks to that goalpost a little bit quicker from alternate paths.
I don't know if in our case, I don't know that I'd call them public-private partnerships. We're working with a lot of particularly new technology companies evaluating their technologies, their providers for whether or not they'll fit and work for us. And so we get a lot of that sort of activity going on. You know, you mentioned portfolios. We'll be rolling out this fall Portfolium, which is a way for students to maintain their own portfolios that will then populate LinkedIn, which is becoming very important for helping students actually locate jobs and internships. So there's a lot of that sort of activity happening. You know, the largest public-private partnership right now we'd have under development probably would be with Achieve Atlanta, which is the third-party intermediary I mentioned a minute ago about working with Atlanta Public Schools and working on that really K through 12 pipeline into the institution and finding out how we can be much more successful with a population that's historically been challenged.
So I think that your partnership issue is, we are working with a private provider to address some lower division challenges. But let me tell you where I think the providers could be very helpful in more partnerships in the area of internships. And because internships we know can facilitate retention and more timely graduation, and that the data is there. There's evidence base to show it. The challenge that we have is there aren't enough internships available. The end result is that we're often criticized because our students who graduate aren't really, quote, ready for the job market. And yet the occupational spectrum is so specialized that it would be hard to believe that we could turn out as many specialized students as the market requires. I think that's a shared responsibility. Mm-hmm. So we're aggressively working on getting our business community up to speed on why internships are necessary to slow down brain drain out of South Florida. And that is a shared responsibility. It can't solely reside on the shoulders of the institutions of higher education in the community. Business has to come to the table in that. So it's not just input, it's maintenance and output in terms of more qualified students ready for the market earlier because they've had the opportunity to work shoulder to shoulder with specialists in their chosen area for a period of time and getting paid for it. And then they know whether they're really ready for that prime time or not. And I don't think we do a good job at all in that area.
And we've taken that on through our Chamber of Commerce. The Metro Atlanta Chamber of Commerce has actually partnered with all the higher education institutions in Metro Atlanta with the business community, because that's easily the most efficient way to get at this.
Yeah.
If I may add, in our case, our focus is on platforms. So we are working with a number of startups on looking at adaptive learning platforms or e-portfolios or other ways of learning. And as a university that has a great degree of competency on community-based learning, we are very much focused on partnership. But when it comes to providing content for our courses, our faculty are simply not at a place where they have any interest whatsoever in that kind of collaboration. We're not that university. And in fact, I would argue if we were to do that, we have one partnership of that kind, which was prior to these innovation efforts. We're talking about maybe 8-10 years old collaboration that existed before we have sort of built our internal capacity to do that work. But if we were to take that path, I would argue that we would jeopardize our work. That's not where we are culturally. And I facilitated a meeting with my colleague with one of the providers. The meeting lasted 12 minutes. So that gives you a sense of where we are.
It was a long meeting.
Most of our partnerships of these natures tend to be focused toward the research and healthcare areas, not as much at the undergraduate success level, other than partnerships with organizations like Bottom Line and so on. But we also are looking very closely at adaptive courseware. But whether that is a partnership or it's the use of a vendor, there's some separation.
Well, I just want to challenge, Psu Quant's approach. In the end, most of our public universities, all of our public universities are about talent. They are clusters of talent. And the economy and sociability are driven by talent. And we have that. And so I think that we got to do a better job in making sure that our faculty understand that in the end, that our sustainability is a function of the value proposition we bring not only intrinsically, educationally, but also to the marketplace. And I think we got to do a better job of telling that story.
Well, actually, I want to add another challenge to that. And this is an ideal I'm stealing from the Atlanta Police Foundation, which is a not-for-profit foundation that exists to support the Atlanta Police Department, much like our foundation support us. And they have a model in their innovation center that I actually think we need to bring into higher ed, which is if you're an outside provider and you want to sell something into their business, at your expense, you have to come into the innovation lab and prove that it works. Otherwise, they won't talk to you. And I think we should have the same culture because we have way too many salespeople trying to sell us something for which we don't have the budgets, or the budgets are going to strain. We have to change. We have to actually change that conversation. They have to prove that it works before we're going to buy it, as opposed to expecting us to buy it and then find out if it works.
I'm watching Bridget saying, here, here, Becker. I think our time is out here, so I'm going to ask the audience to join me in thanking our panel here and also the fantastic teams here today.